Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching this conversation on YouTube or on Rumble. Today, I'm joined by Karim and Peter Beattie. Both of you are experts in politics, and both of you hold PhD, right? Or you are on the way to hold a PhD?
No, we have a PhD already.
You already have a PhD.
And
guilty as charged. That's the one thing I didn't do. I don't know. It's I would say unfortunate or fortunate. Something that I always had on my mind that I would like to engage more in academia. And then the war in Syria erupted, and naturally, without like planning, I started more to be into like podcasting or being an activist, political activist. So the circumstances in Syria played a role on the path of my career choices. I have no regrets at all. But when I was 18, 19, I started studying. I wanted always to become like a lecturer in the university, wanted to have this podium and teaching people about political science and different geopolitical conflicts as well. However, nowadays we're also having podcasts and trying to have a conversation. I remember when I finished this conversation, this was a few weeks ago, with our friend Richard Midhurst, and we were speaking about the Palestine case and the regime change war, and how some of the Arabic countries and the people, we argued that they betrayed the Palestine cause. And you publish an article on Substack. I just want to screen the first part of it. I think for the people to know where you're also publishing. This is, if you guys want to follow BettBeat Media and also Substack, I will put the link in the description below. You can also receive a newsletters, and the title says, "Forget Arab Unity, it's the dollar stupid." So just the first paragraph: in the wake of Syria's fall of Western-backed groups and the ongoing catastrophe in Gaza, I was struck by a recent discussion between friend of the show Kevork Almassian and Richard Midhurst, respected voices in anti-imperialist media, where they passionately decried the lack of unity in the Arab world. Their frustration echoes a familiar chorus throughout anti-imperialist circles: if only Arabs were united, they lament. If only Arab leaders showed backbone. If only the people hadn't celebrated Assad's fall. While their anguish is deeply understandable, given the catastrophic events unfolding, the rhetoric of blame, though emotionally cathartic, fundamentally misses the point and plays directly into imperialist hands. Now, I'm being very honest with you. When I first read all the article, I said, ouch. It was directed directly against the claims you have made. I want to make clear, just to explain where I stand on. The blame that I am personally, I'm speaking to myself now, is for the ordinary people for falling to the narrative trap. And I would like to mention here an example. We all know before World War I, the Arabic people were promised a united Arabic country by the Brits. And they were encouraged to rise against the Ottoman Empire, that you will be granted an autonomous Arabic nation, one united nation. And in exchange for their freedom, they rose against the Ottoman Empire. And once the World War I was over, they were betrayed by the imperialists, and they have been given nothing, basically. And the British and the French, they have colonized the region. They have divided it. They have drawn the maps of the region that we know today, West Asia, and they divided it into spheres of influence. So I know that many people, like generation after generation, some of the stories really, like, probably people miss the context or forget about them. But especially in Syria, for example, we have studied this case particularly in length and in details at schools and secondary school, primary, and also in universities. So always strikes me to see people celebrating a freedom, let's put it between brackets, coming from the imperialists themselves. So I would put a blame here on the people for having not having enough understanding of this, the real agenda of the imperialists for using probably the legitimate anger and the frustration of the people vis-a-vis their governments in order to topple the governments and then replace them with a puppet government, basically not having the freedom and not having their sovereignty, so losing everything, basically. So here you're bringing into our attention the dollar hegemony. I would like also to hear your thoughts. Where do you stand on? Let's start with Karim. And by the way, this is a podcast conversation. Anytime Peter and Karim, we can jump in and have a conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I wrote that article because I've been thinking about that for quite a while. And what you are saying, Kevork, is exactly what I understand and what I feel. And Peter and I had that discussion actually before about it's so frustrating to see all these people who fall for these imperialist narratives. It's extremely frustrating. And I remember, Peter, you always said that we have what you called the curse of knowledge. That is, we expect other people to understand what we understand.
Yes.
But if you are a from 5 to 9 working class individual who does hard work, comes home, puts on the television, like most people who just don't have the time and cannot do the effort to understand the things that are going on in the world, you cannot blame them for being indoctrinated with all that imperialist propaganda. And that brings me to the problem that we have in for example, West Asia, is that we, instead of blaming the individuals for falling for that kind of imperialist propaganda, we actually should have more of a structural analysis. And that is that the United States is so incredibly powerful with its endless stream of money because of the dollar as the reserve currency, that it can sow division all over the world. So it can fund color revolutions, it can fund extremist groups, it can fund media channels such as something like Al Jazeera, for example, but let's say BBC, CNN, etc., etc. It can fund vassals who do the US's bidding. Think about Al-Sisi, for example. It can fund separatist groups, etc., etc. It's a 330 million strong society. It's a big country, but on a planet of almost 8 billion people, that's not very much. Yet it seems to be able to control almost every corner of the world. This has to do with the ridiculous amount of money that the United States has, and that is, as long as we ignore that and say, oh, and why are Arabs falling for that divide and conquer? Most normal people do not have the knowledge that you and I have, and they are continuously bombarded with imperialist propaganda. And also, just not only the propaganda, think about funding extremist groups. The funding of extremist groups, you just need 1 or 2 terrorist attacks and people start to hate each other. And the United States just has money for all of that stuff. And I think we need to have a much more structural analysis about this kind of extreme advantage that the United States has, instead of blaming groups and blaming people. And then we are actually doing the same thing. We are doing the same divide and conquer that we actually blame the people of. What do you think, Peter?
I will give Peter now the opportunity. I just want to bring the conversation to him by saying, like, for example, we have the dollar hegemony of the US, and then you have natural resources. So the Arabic world, it has a massive natural resources. So they should have some leverage over the rest of the world. Should be, if these countries are independent. Like, take example Qatar. And Qatar weaponized Al Jazeera against the people of the region. So Qatar is, Al Jazeera is a Qatari-funded outlet, and you have massive number of outlets all in this network, including these short videos, including the podcast, including independent journalists doing the bidding of Qatar. Research centers, even polling centers in Palestine are funded by Qatar. So here, a country like Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates, they have the money or they have the natural resources, so they can sell these natural resources, but still using the money for and weaponize this money and the media outlets or the indoctrination against the interests of the people in the region. This is where I'm coming from, that we have a probably narrow window of opportunity to maneuver, but we're not even using that to maneuver. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I would then say that still I mean, the United States is not only doesn't only have money to fund propaganda. The United States has also a minimum of 800 military bases. What can these societies do against such immense power? You know what I mean?
So what would be here the solution, Peter?
Well, I mean, I think we'd have to delve a little bit into dollar hegemony, which requires a little bit of a dive into history. So after World War II, you have the Bretton Woods Conference that sets up the international monetary order. Instead of following Keynes' idea of having a neutral currency that would be used to solve balance of trade problems, the US pushes to essentially set the dollar as the world's reserve currency, but with a key difference from today. And that difference was dollars were immediately convertible. I think it was $35 per ounce for gold. So essentially then dollars became just as good as gold, in fact, better than gold, because they're much more easily transferable, et cetera. You don't have to carry all this heavy metal, protect it, blah, blah, blah. Much preferable. So in this world order where currency exchange is set or within a given band for all currencies around the world, everyone has a motivation to accumulate dollars. Not only that, but the US is the only country on earth that's fully industrialized and hasn't had its entire society bombed to smithereens. So the US starts off with this system where dollars are convertible into gold. And so countries around the world have a motivation to accumulate dollars just because it's the same thing as gold, and it's very easy to convert it back into gold. So this is the system up until the 70s. The other thing is when the US buys stuff from around the world, it can just pay in its own currency back then and to today. If you're in, Turkey, you can't send stuff to the or buy stuff from the US in lira. You need to first convert it into dollars, most likely, unless you're dealing with some company that needs lira for some reason. But that's a odd case. Okay, so up until the 70s, you have strains on this peg to gold. Countries like France are demanding their dollars be converted into gold because they think that essentially the US is spending far too much money on its murderous escapades around the world, at this time in Vietnam. So they're doubting the strength of that peg. So anyway, it starts to break down at this point, and then that's where things get really interesting, and the modern form of dollar hegemony starts to emerge. And that is the US eliminates the dollar peg. And you would think that, at that point, why would countries around the world want to continue accumulating dollars? Because now, it's just paper. It's pure fiat. Yes. It doesn't have anything that it's pegged to. But countries basically faced a Sophie's choice. If they sold all of their dollars and exchanged it for something else or bought assets, whatever, they would see a reduction in the value of the dollar, which would help U.S. exporters and harm their imports to the U.S., exports to the U.S., which would then get more expensive. So they didn't have a very good option at that point. So what countries around the world basically did was continue to accumulate dollars. Every commodity in the world is priced in dollars, so they have an intrinsic utility. And, they're a savings instrument that's considered extremely safe. The key thing about the system of dollar hegemony that emerges in the 70s is the deal with Saudi Arabia, which was basically, you keep selling us oil in dollars, but once you get those dollars, you're accumulating shit tons of dollars. We don't want you buying up blue chip companies in the US. We don't want you doing a lot of things with those dollars. We want you to do two things: buy weapons from us and buy treasury securities, buy debt from the US. So that's basically the deal that all major countries that had highly exporting economies, that's what they did. They accumulated dollars. Maybe they bought weapons, they bought whatever exports the US was still exporting. And then the remaining dollars that they had left over from their export surplus with the US, they would just buy US debt. So what
Yes.
that means is the US is able to get real goods and services from the rest of the world, blood, sweat, and tears being put into making products, services, etc. And they do this: type, 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 type on a computer keyboard. Boom, that's it. That's the deal, essentially, because these other countries are just getting treasury securities in exchange for their actual goods and services. So that's the dollar hegemony piece of US empire. Other countries without that exorbitant privilege of printing money that the rest of the world wants to accept, they would see, if they kept spending more, if they kept importing more than they exported, they would see a reduction in the value of their currency. They wouldn't be able to afford those imports, and they sure as hell couldn't afford a global network of military bases. That being said, so that's the nature of dollar hegemony. Absolutely, it's a very powerful kind of peg on which the U.S. empire stands. But it's not, entirely just the U.S. empire doing it. It relies crucially on countries around the world accepting that system and not breaking it, which they could break through unity by organizing and refusing to simply recycle dollars back into U.S. debt. If they got rid of their dollar, they took the hit on their exports to the U.S., then the whole system would come crashing down. So it does rely on the Gulf countries you just mentioned. If because they're accepting dollars for their oil and gas and using those surplus dollars to just buy U.S. debt, that's a huge part of it. China's doing the same thing. We're starting to see perhaps a little fraying around the edges of dollar hegemony, but nothing substantial yet.
Yeah.
So I don't think that really gets to the question of where blame should be thrown around. My position is really the blame is it can go all over the place, including it's. I agree with Karim though that when you're talking about average people, I don't set the bar that high. They've got a lot of other things on their plate. Educating yourself is a full-time job, if not, at least a part-time job.
It is. No,
So,
it is a full-time.
But elites in these countries, I think there's plenty of blame.
But the elites can also be bought. The other day, I was watching a documentary on one of the Lebanese podcasts by Hassan Ali, and he was explaining how the intellectuals in the Arabic world, especially in the left-wing side, were bought by Qatar. And we're not talking about just like personally buying people. No, they're establishing research centers, think tanks, they're funding faculties. And why is this money going to all these research centers, polling centers? Because they create also perceptions, they create narratives, they create public opinion, and they can shift the public opinion to a direction they want. Like, since we're speaking about here dollar hegemony, I really would like to hear your thoughts about Libya, because Libya had the idea of creating a unified African currency based on gold. And I talked to the former spokesperson of Gaddafi, Dr. Musa Ibrahim. I wanted to know if this is just a media report or there were a tangible plan. And he said, like, the plan was there. It wasn't executed because Gaddafi has been killed anyways. So even if any country tries to establish a currency that can, let's say, compete with the US dollar, this country would be decimated. This country would be destroyed. Yeah. The leader would be killed. Yeah. So I totally agree with Karim on this case that the US has an absolute hegemonic power. They can eliminate anyone they want from the scene. So here the people are asking, we're ordinary, like, we're not only people talking politics, but we're also ordinary people, just like thousands of people watching this as well. People are asking, then what's the solution? If China and Russia aren't going to present what they call this blockchain currency based on gold and the currencies of the BRICS countries, or any other country cannot really de-dollarize itself, then we're moving in an empty circle, and this US empire will last probably a century or two if the situation remains the same.
Yeah, exactly. And that is exactly the structural power that I was talking about, Kevork. Even societies, smaller societies that try to get off the dollar, They are born to the Stone Age. I mean, you've seen what happened to them. The only thing that I would rely on, or I would put my hope in, is a major society like China, in the hopes that they are really gonna try and get rid of dollar hegemony. Because right now, I mean, it's unbelievable, but right now China is literally funding the imperialism against its own borders. I mean, China is literally funding the imperialism against its own society, the encirclement of bases, the funding of Uyghur separatists, Hong Kong.
You mean the US is
Taiwan.
funding? The US is funding.
Yeah, US.
I heard China is funding. Okay.
No. US is
But
funding
in a
Uyghur
roundabout way, it
separatists,
is.
Taiwan, Hong Kong, all these separatist movements. And why is it happening? Well, because China is still exchanging assets for dollars, and the United States is just making dollars out of thin air.
Yeah, the irony is they're kind of funding some of that themselves by recycling their dollar surpluses into U.S. Treasury debt. On the other hand, you can understand the position they're in, because, again, their whole industrialization strategy and modernization strategy has relied on getting FDI, not reinventing the wheel for every single little bit of tech, but attracting FDI from the capitalist world so that they can get technology transfer that way. Capitalists are not they're not the Soviet Union. They're not going to send you a bunch of engineers and build a factory, and train your people how to do something. They want a pound of flesh. So the pound of flesh that they demand is, let us come in and exploit the hell out of your people. And that's the deal China made. And, looking back on it now, it's really hard to see any better option that they had. And it seems like that really was the best option that they had, and they played that strategy really well. The question now is, are they at the stage where the FDI spigot and the tech transfer spigot is being turned off? And so it's no longer in their self-interest to continue accepting dollars, recycling them into treasury securities, and essentially funding partially the military encirclement of the U.S. empire. I think what Karim said there is you really need to have unity. Right. If you have one country, like a small country like Libya, that tries to do something that threatens the U.S. empire, yeah, ciao. But if you have Libya and dozens of other countries in Africa, West Asia, East Asia, etc., uniting, then it's an entirely different story. But of course, you have the mother of all collective action problems there, and it's very hard to get people to unite. But nonetheless, that is the only path out of this. So perhaps necessity will force this to happen.
So I received a few phone calls after the regime change from colleagues and friends in the Emirates and in Saudi Arabia, basically telling me the following. They said, don't you think that we know that Israel is behind this regime change, and the Americans and the Brits are behind the regime change? We know these things. Those are just ordinary, let's say, journalists and colleagues there. But because here in our part of the world, we see them as the hegemon power, we don't want to challenge them, because then the result of it will be like what it happened in Syria. So we pursue what is best for our people, and we are here, at least our countries are developing, advancing, and representing a model for the Arabic world that we can make peace with the US, and then we can coexist and live also with Israel. This is what they say, right? So now with the regime change in Syria, I assure you, of course, this is just my subjective opinion. I speak with many Syrians, and every one of them that I speak to, they have been demoralized in the context of this conflict in the region, and they're like, why would I care about Palestine now? We look what happened to us because we took the banner of Palestine and our countries are destroyed. So there is an experience in the region telling the people, ordinary people, which you said they don't have the privilege of time to become enlightened about every aspect of geopolitics, But then they see in a simple way that look at Saudi Arabia, look at Emirates, look at Qatar. They're hosting World Cups. They're hosting all these tech and AI conferences. They're hosting these social media trainings, etc., etc., etc. And Syrians are like, they could like pay their, they would sell their home in order to move to the Emirates, right? Just a visa, so that they would gain some money. So this is the simple example in front of the people, like resistance has a price. So, and the price was so big. So why should we continue in this path if this is the result? You know what I mean? Like, this is a really difficult situation for the people.
Yeah, and I don't see I mean, I think they're right on each individual country level, although they're totally wrong about Saudi and UAE being a model for the Arab world. Like, yeah, if you discover shit tons of gas and oil under your ground, sure, it's a great model, but otherwise, what the fuck model are you talking about? But yeah, any individual country, you have that problem. The only way you get out of that situation is through uniting.
Yeah, and there you have the structure. Yeah. And there you have the structural problem, like you just said, Peter. How can you unite when you have such a major power that just sows division and conflict everywhere and has an endless amount of money to do it? And I think the example that you gave, Kevork, is also can also be ascribed to a structural problem, in the sense that Saudi Arabia is part of the empire. And the empire, if you play the game right, the empire can make you a slave with a lot of money. And people who say, I prefer that over having my society bombed to the Stone Ages, we cannot blame that on the people. That is the structural problem that we are going against. How can you beat that? I mean, like I said, the only way you can beat that is to get the United States off the dollar throne. I just don't see other solution in that sense.
And that also requires unity.
Yeah, and this structural problem that you are describing is very accurate, and it requires a power that can counter this structural problem. So the Arab world, because they're so divided, they always need an outside force backing them. Remember the era of the Soviet Union. Now the people are expecting for Russia or China to come in, and I'm not really on the side of this argument that we need Russia or China to back the Arabic world, because the region has a massive wealth, as I mentioned, but because it's divided and some of the countries are part of the empire itself, like Saudi Arabia, for example, then probably the people may need outside support. But in this case, it turned out after 14 years of regime change war, for example, in Syria, or in the genocide in Gaza, that Russia and China were not really actively engaged in countering the imperialist power in this case, and that is the US. And I would like to give two examples. One is Idlib. So the attack on the Aleppo and then the crumbling of the regime started from Idlib. And in Idlib, there were between 5,000 to 15,000 Uyghurs from China. So we're only talking about the men, not the families, right? Fighters there. So Syria asked many times like intelligence cooperation with China, so to locate these Uyghurs and eliminate them. No response. Weapon supplies, like you already paid the money to Russia and China, and you don't receive the weapons. Then genocide happens in Gaza, and then Russia and China harshly criticize, but tangibly, actually, on the ground, they don't do the necessary work, diplomatic, economic, military, in every aspect to stop it. So the US is still the hegemon power. It's the dominant power. So we're speaking about multipolarity that is in the process of probably forming in the future. But now we're still living in a unipolar world.
Exactly. Totally agree with you, Kevork. And on our Substack, bettbeat.substack.com, I actually wrote about exactly that Russia and China have a lot of very good harsh words also in the UN with regards to the genocide, but real tangible action is not there. And I think that is I think that is a big mistake. Others would say, well, you need to be patient. They play the long chess game. I I don't know. I have the feeling that China is, and don't get me wrong, I live in China. I love it here. I think it's an amazing society. But I think China is not realizing what's coming for them. That's my opinion. Because with the fall of Syria, the US is encroaching on China even closer, with Uyghurs walking around everywhere, separatists. And the fact that they have let this slide, in my opinion, is a big mistake. But yeah, what should they have done? I have no idea. Maybe you have an idea, Peter, but I have a feeling that they're way too passive.
But the rhetoric now is directed at China, and you see that there are articles and even video reportages talking about the Uyghurs in the Islamic Turkestan army in Syria and how they're preparing themselves to go to Xinjiang. So this is a problem that will be exported sooner or later on the borders with inside China, basically. And this is the only, in my opinion, way the US can destabilize China, because they can't go to war directly against China. So they need to destabilize the country from within. And if China goes in a war against an armed insurgency, you know what's going to happen. Every single human rights organization that you know, every single these NGOs, the press, it is going to be a consensus against China, and they have the information warfare and the psychological operations that they wage. It's so sophisticated. I can assure you, there were towns and cities fell in Syria by psychological operations without one bullet, without even shooting one bullet. I know the situation in Syria was rotten, but they managed to demoralize the people and even the army just by the press. So they will play such games against China sooner or later. And I see really a big failure from the Chinese side to at least cooperate on an intelligence level to locate these Uyghurs in Idlib. I don't understand the passivity, because, okay, they say we don't want to invest in Syria. There is still security was not, it's not really stable, and we're waiting for the political process. And after that, maybe we invest. But if they invested in Syria under Assad and they enabled the Syrian economy, then this would have prevented the regime change, because what happened is the collapse of the Syrian economy has led the people to push the people beyond the poverty line, and 90% of the people are poor. They can't secure a bread. If I'm a soldier fighting on the front line and my family are hungry, why would I fight if this was the outcome of the war after 12 years or 13 years? So one of the aspects is the allies didn't invest also enough. So this is like, we're doing some brainstorming, because it's important to also mention the I don't want to say failures, but some of the policies is just, I don't understand it. Maybe they have bigger calculations, but from the outcome of the conflict, it looks to me that Russia is a loser, China is a loser, Iran is a loser, and those are the three pillars of the Eurasian region, right? This conflict, and the US, Israel, and Turkey are the winners of this conflict.
Yeah, I can't. I don't have a line to Beijing, but my sense is they're not terribly worried about the thousands of Uyghur extremist fighters in Syria, because they've got, their borders well secured. Certainly, if that weren't the case and there were an insurgency, like you said, the Western media would go crazy, demonizing the Chinese government and trying to get everyone against them. There was an article, I don't know if you saw it, in the Atlantic last week, that was asking, why are all these leftists so concerned about the genocide in Gaza, but you don't hear them talk about the genocide in Xinjiang? Like, basically what they're saying is leftists are not as concerned about a genocide for which there's zero evidence of mass murder or genocidal intent versus one in which there is copious evidence of mass murder and genocidal intent. But that just goes to show how the U.S. media would and will continue to cover this and try to make this give a black eye to China in the global public opinion war. Beyond that, the other issue is force projection. Like, that's a term you hear U.S. military people talk about all the time. The U.S. has force projection capabilities that no country on earth comes close to. They can send troops, bomb wherever on earth they want to, because they have this network of military bases. They dominate the sky, the water, etc. if China wanted to do something that the US can easily do in West Asia, they simply don't have the ability. Well, what are they going to do? Send one of their 2 or 3 aircraft carriers across the world and get sunk on the way? There's also these practical considerations in terms of projecting military force. When it comes to economic possibilities, well, that's another realm. But again, I think they probably looked at the political situation as too fragile, too weak, and they have a history of generally. I mean, you can't say that they have a history of not interfering at all in neighboring countries. But compared to what the U.S. does or Europeans do, their history has been very pacifist by comparison, relatively speaking. So I think the idea of meddling around the world to that extent is not a tradition. And the other problem, which I think is bigger, is they just don't have the power anywhere near the level that the US has power in terms of force projection.
And the values in China are different. The philosophy of life in China is different from the United States, from Europe. I feel like spirituality plays lots of role in the Eastern societies as well. This mutual respect of other cultures, this willingness to dominate and subjugate. This behavior, I see it a lot in academics, for example, in academia, in think tanks in the West. Like, they speak to me like I'm an idiot, sorry for the expression, because they see me coming from Syria. So that's already for them, it's a judgment that you come from Syria, you can't be smarter than me. Like there is this mental colonialism, or whatever you want to call it, and then they speak with you like you're a child, like they want to tell you what is best for your country and what is best for your society. And I'm like, this is something that it doesn't work with me. In the contrary, it has a very the opposite effect. But I know a lot, my friends. I know a lot of my university colleagues. They bow to this type of behavior, and they like to be very, how to say, they want to make use of this because they want to advance their careers, whether in academia or in politics or in media. So they choose to bow. This is something that I realized, like, am I doing it wrong? Because my life has become so much more difficult than it should be, But my friends, my colleagues from university, which I used to teach them in the university, by basically coming to me at the last day to teach them the lecture for the exam. And then you see them on major outlets. They're given prizes, medals, conferences, meeting with the leaders in the free world, scholarships, name it. And so this is part of the empire, that you are gifted, you are given jobs, you're given money, you're given titles, you. But if you are on the other side, you will lose all these things. So you are on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that. Peter and myself, we are both professors in China, and that's a good thing, because we can say and research the things that we want to research, such as imperialism, how capitalism interacts with our societies, all these kind of things. But if you want to have an easy career, especially in the West, just go along with the mainstream, and you will get the prizes, and you will get the awards and the grants. But there are some people like yourself, Kevork, and I would say Peter and myself also, who just can't do it, who just cannot bow and kiss the ass of people who go along with the group and with the powerful, so to speak. And if you are a person like that, you have to find a way to be able to do what you like and find the right environment for it. And for me, that was to leave Europe and to start working in China, where I could work on the kinds of research that I would like to do. That is very West critical, like you just said. The West is a unique society, and of course, there are many cultures in the West, but in general, European societies are very, very supremacist, you could say, very much focused on domination, hegemony. You see it now in the United States, who took over, of course, who took over the world empire from the Brits, and also the Dutch and the French and the Portuguese, etc. But that is something you don't see in China. And you made a very good point in the sense that Chinese culture is, in that sense, very different. It's a much more focused on relationships, interdependence, other harmony with other societies. That's why they are often less critical of societies that have different values. They don't go to other societies like Afghanistan and say, you have to have our values if you want to be, if you want to trade with us, and you have to be like us. And China is in that sense very, very different, and that has also been very differently historically. But in the West, we are very much used to a world that listens to us. Now I say us just to generalize a bit, but in the West we are very much used to a world that listens to the West, and if they don't, we punish them. Very simple. And that has created a culture that has just, in my opinion, I think the United States is the demon spawn of that culture that has gone way out of hand, with so much power, just thinking that it can control and needs to control the whole world. And it needs to counteract this. You need voices like you, Kevork, who go against the grain. But it's very important that you find a good environment where you are able to do that, yes, without being fearful for your future or even your life.
I do have fear every day, and this is the problem. Living in the West, like, I'm not a radical person. The way we're talking now, conversation, like two or three friends do in a cafeteria, like everywhere, right? We're just trying to make sense of things. We're not spreading hatred. We're not spreading fear. We're not trying to indoctrinate the people or to radicalize them. None of this, like we're just trying to make sense. That's it. And therefore, if anyone is watching from China and knows how to move a podcast to China, I would be ready to receive applications on my email address. somewhere warmer than here. If there are some waters, that would be amazing. I cannot live in a cold place any longer. I'm serious. Like, I'm not a tree to stay, and I want to also have options and freedom. And from the way that I'm presenting things, it seems that this is a dangerous narrative for whatever you want to call it, establishment or non-establishment, and it gets it also slows my work, because then I have to think what to say every time and what not to say. I write things sometimes and I delete, because I receive a message from a friend telling me, be careful, you just use this word, maybe they would interpret it in a different way. But I never think about these things because I have a positive intentions. I don't really trying to create, let's say, a climate of anger, whether in West Europe or in anywhere else. But I'm trying to protect my people. This is the motivation that I have all the time. And in this case, since we were speaking about imperialism, I think one of the major events that happened in the past years was in Palestine. Like, what happened in Palestine has shown to us that the empire is ready to go to the end. Like, they're determined to do whatever it takes to keep their hegemonic status in the region. And I think that the axis of resistance, or what used to be an axis of resistance, had an opportunity. And I'm not here to blame anyone now. I'm just saying that the axis of resistance now is not in a place to be able to kick American and Israeli hegemony out of the region now. It's not now. We're talking about January 2025. It's not possible. It has to be studied again, take a step back and see the failures and correct the errors and create a new alliances in the region. This will take few decades, in my opinion. But we have to accept the new reality, so that we know that if we want to run against this new reality, then we have to take our time and think. I'm talking about the people of the region. But now we have a potential ceasefire agreement in Gaza. And I'm reading different theories about it, some of which is, of course, Netanyahu was forced to sign this ceasefire agreement, and Trump pressed him, and this was mentioned by Haaretz. However, there is another theory in this, and I would like to show you this, which was published by Dan on X, and this is something I will just zoom in a little bit. And this gone viral yesterday. He says, my beliefs, Netanyahu and other top Israelis are happy that Trump won. Trump has staffed his security state with extreme Zionists. There is no rift between Trump and Netanyahu. This ceasefire was designed to roll out in conjunction with the Trump inauguration. He says, Witkoff didn't force Netanyahu to accept this pre-arranged deal. 6, Trump didn't lay his thing down on Israel and press stories of the Israeli government charging are fake and planned. This pressing story. The Palestinian people are in extreme jeopardy. Iran, Hezbollah, and Yemen remain U.S. and Israeli military targets. West Bank annexation remains a U.S. and Israeli objective. Temporary ceasefire will, for a time, remove the basis and global support for Iranian, Lebanese, Iranian, or Yemeni military attacks on Israel. The temporary ceasefire will allow Israel to restock, rest, and recuperate and plan. The temporary ceasefire will give Israel a break from global pressure, sanctions, and prosecution. Global attention will turn away from Israel and its criminal actions. Regime media will promote the idea of moving forward, not looking backward. I hope I'm wrong about some of this, but I strongly suspect these things are true. And this was endorsed by one of the anti-Zionist professors, David Miller. He says, this is spot on. It's not a ceasefire. It's a regional reordering. The idea is to Zionize as much of West Asia as possible, just as was planned before Operation Al-Aqsa Storm, and to wipe out the resistance. Remember that when you hear about negotiations between the US and Iran in the coming days too, the Pezeshkian government is giving up the resistance and Iran's nuclear program for a vague promise of sanctions relief, because it is fully on board with the Zionization of West Asia against the wishes of millions of Iranians. The counter-revolutionary liberal government of Pezeshkian is begging for crumbs from an enemy that will crush it. The US seeks to dominate Iran's resources and effectively own its economy. Little wonder that the people call the Pezeshkian government a coup regime, or have major questions about the suspicious death of President Raisi. Those are really harsh words. Like, those are really bold predictions. Like, I don't rule out that Iran will strike a deal with the US in the coming months after these developments in the region. Now that Lebanon also have a pro-US, pro-Saudi prime minister, president, and the prime minister is endorsed by the US as well, and he was proposed by Saudi Arabia, and they excluded Hezbollah and Amal from the government. Syria is gone. So I don't, probably this ceasefire is an opportunity for Saudi Arabia also to normalize ties with Israel.
Peter?
Yeah, it certainly could be. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable supposition, but we've got to recognize it's just that. It's a supposition. Unless he's got sources inside the Israeli government, which I doubt, he's drawing conclusions on the basis of the little evidence that we have available. I think it's just as likely. I think it's probably more likely that the stories coming out of Haaretz, the hand-wringing and the anger on the Israeli right at the Trump administration for daring to break their hearts after giving them so much happiness when he said, he'd bring hell on earth to the Palestinians. What is this guy doing? I think that is more likely to be true, but we lack the evidence to be able to be confident about any of this. So I would just say, that's a plausible supposition, but until we see more evidence, I'm not confident at all about that. And I would definitely lean in the direction of Trump being Trump, wanting to have a cessation of violence for his inauguration so he can brag about how he's a peacemaker, blah, blah, blah. And it also bolsters his plans to normalize relations with Saudi and Israel. You just can't get that done with a genocide ongoing. So there's plenty of reasoning to support the picture coming out of the liberal Israeli press right now. I don't know what additional evidence there is that I'm not aware of that would bolster the claim just made here by Dan.
If Saudi Arabia normalizes relations in the coming months, would this be an evidence that the ceasefire was an opportunity to give a time and a space and to relieve this pressure from both sides, Israel and Saudi Arabia, to strike a deal?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't see how, like, that's something that the U.S. government wanted anyway. That's something that a lot of people in the Saudi government want anyway. That's what people in the Israeli government want anyway. So I just would take it as a thank God if it actually does get signed and the murder actually stops. I would take that as a thank fucking God. There's at least a pause in this slaughter. And of course, there are other considerations, and those considerations you just mentioned have been long running. So, yeah.
And what would be the implications, Karim, of this possible peace treaty between Saudi Arabia and Israel on the Palestinians?
Oh man, it's also difficult to predict. I think also the Pezeshkian situation. It's so hard to understand what is going on here. It's on the one hand, you have people like David Miller saying that okay, he's probably going to sell out. But on the other hand, you hear, of course, Professor Marandi saying very different things. That he's still saying to today, just wait, the answer, the reply is coming from Iran. So I seriously have no idea what to expect anymore. And what I have learned in the past 15 months is that we literally cannot believe any narrative that we see in the media whatsoever. I mean, whether it's about the New Orleans attack, whether it's about what's happening in Palestine, whether it's about HTS, there's literally nothing you can believe anymore. And about the Palestinians, Kevork, I have deep respect for a people that still until today is fighting back. I am myself half Algerian. My mother is Dutch. My dad is Algerian. And I know the sacrifices that also have been given in my family to get the Algerians out of French colonialism, which was very comparable to the pain and suffering that we see today. And the Palestinians are still going strong in that sense, fighting back whilst their whole society has been pretty much destroyed and they're being tortured and raped on a daily basis. It's absolutely horrendous. Where this is going, like Peter said, I hope they will get at least some a ceasefire to get some room to breathe. But the future, I try to have hope, but it's very difficult to see any hope. I think the problem also among Westerners is that we have relied our hope too much on the resistance. Small or relatively small groups of people from very poor, economically poor societies that have fought heroically against the biggest and most powerful empire in human history. And we in the West, not everyone, but most of us in the West were just onlookers and cheering on, while actually what is happening in West Asia is on us. These are
in our names.
These are our democratic leaders that are bombing West Asia, and instead that anti-imperialist commentators say that the Arabs asked for this and they can blame themselves, and the biggest enemy of Arabs are Arabs themselves. I hear some anti-imperialist commentators say that kind of stuff. Well, let's be honest. It's our government's bombs that are being dropped on West Asia. So I think we have a much bigger responsibility to stop this from happening. And I think we are not doing enough as people in the West. So I think we should keep our accusations to ourselves and try to help people more by doing something against this.
But can we agree that it is important to be a little bit cautious with optimism in the region, that many people raise the hopes so high that the disappointment is now even bigger because the military operation, at least in this phase between all the conflicting parties, didn't end up in the way that the people expected to be. And in this case, we're talking about people were talking about the liberation of Palestine, or at least the some sort of deterrence against the Israeli occupation forces. And in this case, the Lebanese achieved a little bit deterrence at the beginning, and then they lost it. The escalatory patterns were almost together, and then the pagers and the decapitations happened. So on a more, let's say, intelligence level, and with the weaponization of AI and collecting the data, and everyone's mobile is just a spying phone. Nobody can trust anything any longer, and it shouldn't, rightfully so. So I think the Americans and the Israelis have this superiority over the data superiority, and they detected many of the leaderships of Hezbollah through the voice stamp. So what they did, basically, they were spying on them in Syria, and many people were using WhatsApp. So imagine you're part of the organization like Hezbollah, and you're using WhatsApp. It's just like you're sitting with the Mossad, you're sitting with the NSA, and they're like you're sending voice messages. They have your voice stamp, and then they can even detect you by saying hello. Like if you have a smartphone somewhere and you say hello, they can detect you and they can know your location. It's a really complicated and sophisticated, I would say, technological approach from the Israeli side, and it is important for the people to be cautious and be also accept that if you consider Israel your enemy, then you have to accept that your enemy is superior in these things, so that you can fix or try to develop in the fields that if you're not also sucking the data of the Israelis. So Israel is superior over you. So
and that is the Kevork, to jump in quickly. That is exactly that structural problem that I was talking about in the beginning. You're up against such a major, overwhelming force coming from the United States, which is for a large part because of such an advantage when it comes to an endless stream of money with the dollar hegemony. That they're technologically advanced, they can buy everything off. And then you have people like in Yemen or Hezbollah or other groups that are fighting against such a powerful empire.
yes.
And I think we can all come to the conclusion, because for the past years, many people were talking about the U.S. decline, continuously about U.S. decline. I think we're all a little bit humbled, I think.
Yes.
And have to realize that the American empire is still way
Alive.
more powerful than we expected.
Yes, I totally agree with you on this. By the way, if the followers of Syriana Analysis would like to follow some of your podcasts, where they can find your work?
Well, you can see it between brackets behind my name, BettBeat Media. We do a lot of interviews with people with an anti-imperialist angle, such as yourself, Kevork. Many others. We talked today to Tariq Chiril Amar. He said hi to you, Kevork, so we also had to say hi to you. We had recent conversation for your respected audience. Please go to our channel and check our latest discussion with Professor Michael Hudson, who actually literally talks about what we were talking about today. Why is the US so powerful, and how does the US maintain its imperialism by misusing the dollar? So for those who are interested in understanding this, please check. But many other talks with Moin Rabbani, Matt Kennard, Vijay Prashad, Alexander McKay, and of course our good friend Dimitri Laskaris. So if people are interested, they can come.
Tomorrow I'm going to be on the show of Dimitri. He's a really good journalist also. He's from Greece. I think he's now in Canada. And this is also the Substack, guys, scrolling on the screen. And the YouTube channel, I already tagged it in the description below. It's just written follow, and then you can see the tag. So you can also follow this podcast. What else I was going to say? I had something in my mind I wanted to say before wrapping up this. Sometimes things just evaporate all of a sudden. But I'm very grateful for having you both on the show and having this conversation. It's very important to have this type of chit chat for our sake and for the sake of the people. So guys, if you like this content, I would encourage us to hit the like button, subscribe to Syriana Analysis, subscribe to their podcast, which is in the description below. And if you like to support the independent work I'm doing, you can support it through Patreon, which is scrolling on the screen, or there are other different means in the description below. And we will do another live streaming tomorrow on the 16th of January, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. I wish you peace. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Peace be upon you, Karim, and peace be upon you, Peter. And I will see you soon.
Upon you.
Thanks, Kevork. Good talking.